see you. I've missed you, and I'm really honored that you're here. Rosh Hashanah is soon upon us. I don't know about you, but every time we get to this season, go to shul, hear the opening tune, and think, wow, I am so underprepared. And I guess I'll never fully feel prepared, but the process of tshuva, of thinking about our families and our wishes for the coming year, and our desire for health and happiness, and peace within families and peace within communities. All of us feel those things. So the question I've been struggling with this year isn't so much about tshuva as a change process, because that is, as difficult as it is, it's relatively easy. I want to talk about sustainability. And by sustainability, I'm not talking about climate change or recycling or driving an electric car. I'm talking about how you sustain the changes that you've made. Because after all, that's really, in many ways, the most significant challenge. You know, you can change for a day, you change because for the few days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the few days after Yom Kippur, you're feeling good about yourself, you're feeling that you can overcome all these pulls on your time, on your inclinations, you feel good. But come the mid-November, and you lose some of that energy. And sometimes you lose some of that energy even earlier. So what I want to talk about today is this question of tshuva, making tshuva stick this year. And I want to do that in an unusual way. So you'll allow me some creative freedom. I'm going to share my screen with you and make sure that you can all see. No, that didn't work. Okay. There's my lovely family though. Okay. Can you see this? You cannot, right? Can you see a source sheet? I'm going to stop the share. We're going to try that again. That's weird. All right, let's see if it works this time. Okay, now you can see it, right?
Yes.
You can a stick this year. Okay, we're going to go back to the painting. You know that I love to teach with painting, so we're going to go back to that. I want to just start with a reflective question. And I want you to think of a time or a place that you want to return to because you felt totally authentic, loved, happy, and safe. So this can be either a place or a time in your life where you say, I really would like to return to that because that was a great time in my life. So I'm going to stop the share and we'll just start with that question. You'd like to return to this time or this place because there's something about what it did for you and the way that you felt that made you feel authentic and whole and happy. Who's going to start us off? You know, Samantha, I'm going to ask you to start us off. You knew it. You knew it was coming.
I did. I was just washing my hands from all the gook on it. A time and a place I felt authentic. Okay, I'm gonna say, it's a hard question.
It is a hard question, but it's a good question.
It's very good. You always ask very good questions, Erica.
No, it's because then I don't have to answer them myself. I just give them to you.
Well, that's what makes you a genius. I'm going to say it's not very deep, but when I felt my best, my most authentic,
the place where you
safe,
say, I'd like to return to this place. Or time.
I'm going to say childhood, like elementary school years. I had the best childhood.
Oh, amazing. Okay. So returning to childhood, that could be place and time. Someone else. Rabbi, how about you?
I would say
that was coming also.
Yeah, I know. I would say my years in yeshiva.
Because?
Rabbi Wein always used to say to us, he would say, when it comes to leaving the yeshiva, don't leave early and don't leave happy. And I couldn't appreciate it until we left and we weren't happy. Not that we're not happy now, but you just felt like you had no other, you were completely wrapped in the world of Torah and study and development. And there's something just so pure and wholesome about it that we can never get back to that.
Yeah. And we live with so much distraction now. So even any really profound immersive experience feels amazing. I saw that. Okay. Anyone else? Time or place you felt, I really would like to return to this.
Israel is the obvious answer.
Okay.
My trips is when you're just walking in Yerushalayim and you feel the history that you're walking on stones where people that were magnificent people that were our forefathers were there, and now I'm enjoying that same feeling.
Yeah, and it's such a good feeling. I have to say that this year we went to Israel recently to mark the yahrzeit of my third yahrzeit of my father-in-law, and I wanted to do one thing when I was there besides being with my family. I wanted to go. There's the stairs that there's a big excavation. They've been doing it for 11 years. The stairs that go up to the Kotel. When people made pilgrimages, they went up those stairs. Rabbi, have you been there? Anyone been there? So, and because it's not open to the public, you need some access. I couldn't figure out how to get there. And I sat next to a friend at a wedding. I said, "What's your daughter doing?" She said, "She's an archaeologist. She's one of a team of 4 that is doing this dig." So we got to go. We spent an hour and a half. And the feeling of walking in history, Ben, it's exactly what you mentioned. So now we're going to ask a less comfortable question, but very critical for the text that I want to show you tonight. And that is, think of a time or place you say, I never want to return to that. When I think about that, even if I go near that place or I think about that time, it triggers something very powerful and very negative for me. Now, you don't, if it's personal, too personal, you certainly don't have to share it. Unless you want to and you want to be my best friend.
I can say that I would never want to return again to my parents' funerals.
Ah, okay. So a place, and I imagine that if you go to another funeral there, that it's haunting in some way.
Right. Just thinking about it. Yeah. Every time I visit, same thing.
Yeah. The visit, it brings back this terrible loss and grief. Anyone else?
I remember sitting with my mother and my dear wife when my father was being treated for what they thought was a meningioma, and it turned out it was a glioblastoma, and waiting for the surgeon to come out and telling us that. And it took 3 months out of his life as he tried to recover from brain surgery and only had 13 months left.
Yeah, that's that moment, being in a hospital. For a lot of people, hospitals are places that they never want to return to. Associations, their own pain, the suffering of others, that can be a hard place. Anyone else? If you can show me your beautiful panim, I would be so grateful. I know if you could put your camera on, I know that some people don't want to, but if you can, I would be very grateful. Anyone else think of a place you go, never want to go back there?
Sure. I did March of the Living, and going to visit the concentration camps, and it was really Poland in general. I have no desire to ever go back.
Yeah, no desire to ever go back. My grandparents are survivors. My mom's a survivor. There were opportunities. I said, "Do you want to go on a heritage tour?" I was young. I really didn't understand the depth of despair at that point. And they said, "We'll never go back there." So I want to think of that as an image of change and holding on to change. And part of it has to do with the fear of going back to a place where we behave in ways that don't support the changes that we want to make. So I'm going to look at, I'd like to look at an amazing story about returning. Amazing story about returning. Okay, here we go. So this is the Gemara in Chagiga. It is a very famous, it's a Talmudic story. It's a very famous story. And I'll do a little bit in Hebrew and then we'll do it in English. Many of you, if you've read As a Driven Leaf by Milton Steinberg, you're familiar with this story. If you read the Gemara, you're familiar with it. I don't think there's a movie of it, but there you go. Tanu Rabbanan, Maseh Ba'acher, Shaya Rochev al Hasus b'Shabbat. So this is an incredible scene. I think it would make an incredible play. Something happened. There was an event, an incident. Acher, who was Elisha ben Avuya. Elisha ben Avuya was a scholar, a great emerging scholar, and he had a moment where he gave up all of faith. He was climbing a ladder. He saw someone climbing a ladder, a child climbing a ladder to shoo away the mother bird. So that he could take the eggs. And those are the 2 mitzvot. Oh, I think he was doing it to honor a parent. And those are 2 mitzvot where you're promised arichut yamim, long life. And the child falls down and dies. And Elisha ben Avuya says, "I'm done. Zu Torah, zu scharan. This is the Torah. This is the reward. I'm done." But Interestingly enough, he maintained his relationship with Rabbi Meir, another very famous scholar of the time. So I want you to imagine it's Shabbat, and this is someone, the equivalent would be, right? The two of them, Rabbi Meir is walking, he's on the horse, and they're talking to each other, and they're talking Torah to each other. They're studying together. They're sharing words of wisdom together. This would be the equivalent of Rabbi Klemenov is walking to shul, and a congregant who just gave up his faith is driving by next to him in his Tesla, and the two of them are sharing Divrei Torah, right? So it's sort of inconceivable. Amar lo, they get to a certain point, and Elisha ben Avuya says, Meir, chozer lacharecha, shekvar shi'arti bikvei susi ad kan tchum Shabbat. He says, you can't go any further, Rabbi Meir, because we've reached the boundary measure of Shabbat, and that's a place where it's illegal for you to go if you're keeping Jewish law. Now, what's fascinating about this? That Elisha ben Avuya cares. In other words, you could say, I don't care about observance, and I don't care about your observance. Who is watching? Who is watching this? The person who's watching and being careful is actually the heretic. Amar lo, and Rabbi Meir says, Afatah chozer bach. You know what? I'm going to use this as a symbol. I'm going to return, and you'll go to return with me. In other words, I'll return from making sure that I don't keep this, that I don't transgress this prohibition, and you'll come back with me in the totality of Judaism. Come back with me. And then Elisha ben Avuya Acher says, Amar lo v'lo kfar amarti lecha, kfar shamati ma'acharei ha'pargod shuvu banim shobavim chutz me'acher. He says, I've already told you that I heard from a heavenly voice that said, all should return, all my children should return, except for Acher, except for me. So I want to stop the share for a second. This is a really interesting story. He hears this thing. He hears that everyone has a chance to return to their best selves, to the self that they like best, except for me. Do you or do you not believe him? Can everybody do this, but I can't do this? Do you believe him? Paula, you're looking the eyebrow. You got the eyebrow up. You believer? You're a believer or not a believer? Not a believer. Can you give me a sentence about it? Please?
Well, it's hard to believe he's so different than anybody else.
Yeah.
I mean,
So what do you think
anything
is going on here?
He's stuck.
He's stuck. But this is really stuck. If you say to someone, God said this to me. God said everyone can change except for you. Sorry, bad boy. You can't change. You have really convinced yourself that there is no way out. I've had the honor, I'll say, of teaching a number of people who are in various states of addiction, and they are trying very, very hard to overcome their addiction. And sometimes the idea, that's exactly in the chat. You give up on yourself and you believe that everyone has the capacity to change, or no one has the capacity to change. But even if someone's changing, it's not me. I can't do it. This is who I am. And you'll see this all the time. People in friendships, people in marriages, people with estranged children, they'll say, listen, this is it. I can't do anything about it. This is where we are. And I appreciate that. En Yehush Ba'olam Klal. We could sing a little bit of that. Not to give up, but on the other hand, we see this all the time. People give up on who they think they can become. So Acher says, there's nothing doing. I can't do anything about it. And I want to tell you, I've studied this story many, many times and encountered it. And I always believed him. I think I believed him. I thought he was trustworthy because he cared about Rabbi Meir's observance. And that somehow influenced me until I read the following. So we're going to go back to our sheet. Let's see. And this is what Rabbi Sachs give you a little, yes, you can. Rabbi Sachs had on his Psychology of Tshuva, he says, true or false, Elisha ben Avuya is saying what he wants to believe, that he's helpless, that he can't turn, for the gates have been locked against him. It's a classic paradox of wish fulfillment. If we believe that we cannot change, then we never will. We will be proved correct. but it was not true. Now, I read this in the late 80s. This originally appeared in Le'ela, which is a journal out of Jews College. There's no Le'ela, there's no Jews College anymore. But I learned and taught there from 1988 to 1990, and I came across this piece, which has subsequently been reprinted, and you can get the whole thing. And I remember when I read this, he said, but it wasn't true. I go, what do you mean? The Gemara said it. And then I was thinking about the mindset that this person thinks, acher, I am different. I'm so different from everybody that I'm the only person who cannot change. And he says the power to turn back is never taken away from us. We may even enlist a voice from heaven to support our claim that for us the way is closed, but it never is. These are barriers of the mind, barriers that Maimonides was relentless in tearing down, right? That we all have free will. The story of Elisha ben Avuya is of a man who felt that he could not liberate himself from his past. Equally powerful is the feeling that we can have in moments of despair that we cannot liberate ourselves from our future. So that's really what I want to think about with you today is, can you liberate yourself from the past and really do it this year and say, this is the year, something I've been working on for all these years. Everyone says it's Lashon Hara, but it's, that's always an easy fallback. I'm not going to speak badly about people. And then we do really on the spot or on the day, or we think badly. Think about something you say, I've had a particular challenge in my life. It's a challenge of anger management. It might be a challenge of weight loss. It might be a challenge of exercising. It might be a challenge of behaving a certain way towards one's children or grandchildren. These things are hard and they challenge us every year. And we ask forgiveness every year for the same thing. And at a point you think, there's not a chance. I am 40 years old, 50 years old, 20 years old, 60 years old, 80 years old. Things are not going to change for me. I think a lot of us get that feeling of being stuck. And then we hear Acher's voice who says, you know what? I don't believe. I believe even God thinks that I can't do this anymore. And people get to that position. So I wanted to take you to a very different place with me. We're going to go to Egypt tonight. And I know you're thinking, Erica, I'm in Livingston. I'm actually in Chicago, so I'm not where I normally am. I'm with my children, my grandchildren, my one set that are here. So we're all going to go from wherever we are, we're going to go somewhere differently. We're going to go somewhere different. And the place I want to take you to is Egypt. And we're going to go to our source sheet. Wow. Oh, the Rebbitzin is coming. The party is here. If the Rebbitzin is here, the party is here. So there's a statement in Mishlei, in Proverbs, Kol ba'eha lo yishuvun v'lo yasigu orchot chayim. All who go cannot return, right? This is a story of, it's a parable of a harlot, that there are places where you go where it's very hard to return from, because once you're there, you sort of feel trapped. And that's a trap that the book of Proverbs, Mishlei, warns against. Don't even try to go there, because once you go there, it sucks you into the vortex. Now, we all know, because we all are in relationships that are like this. If I sit next to this person, there's going to be gossip the whole time. If I go visit this person, I'm going to get upset about myself and our past. And so we all know that feeling. And yet we actually have a prohibition that there's a place we actually are never allowed to go back to, and that is Egypt. All right. So to put you in mind that we're in Egypt, look at here. I gave you a little painting from the 19th century, an English artist, Israel and Egypt. And you can see people being pulled and tugged, and you can see the hard work that we engaged in. So you sort of get a feeling, when I leave here, I never want to stay here. I am out of here. And you get a sense also of the different kinds of jobs we had: building jobs, pulling jobs. You can see probably the fanning job up on the moving the Sphinx. So and you can see in the front right here. You see in the foreground, there's someone who's obviously dehydrated or injured. Someone's looking, but it's only slaves that are looking at another slave. No one else is paying any attention. And you see people with whips, and it's a very painful scene. So the Isur, the prohibition that we have, is don't ever go back to Egypt. And I want to look at that, and you'll say, Erica, wrong holiday, and I know it, but I want to look at Maimonides. Maimonides wrote, you can live anywhere in the entire world with the exception of the land of Egypt. And he actually measures it out for you, a certain number of miles, square miles, from the Mediterranean Sea proceeding westward onto Kush in the desert, Ethiopia in the desert. If you can imagine, he's actually sort of drawing a picture for you, and almost with a tape measure. If you were thinking of going back to Egypt, you can't go there. And he says it's forbidden to dwell in this entire territory. You can't go back there. And then he gives you the proof text, the biblical verses that support this. One is in Devarim, two are in Devarim, and one is in Shemot, Deuteronomy, and Exodus. God told you, you can never go back on that path. And then later, you will not see it again. And about the Egyptians, you shall never see them again. So I want to actually stop the share and ask you, why can't I go back to Egypt? What's the big deal? I imagine some people in this Zoom room have actually been to Egypt. I've been to Egypt. And Maimonides, by the way, BTW, lived in Egypt. So you can imagine that all the commentators don't know what to do with themselves. He was there. He was forced to be there because he was in service to the vizier. There are ways that we're trying to get out of it, but in principle, the problem is there. You're not allowed to go there, and yet you're there. So any thoughts about why you can't go back to Egypt? What are we worried about?
Well, I don't know what I'm worried about, but I was thinking, my first thought was that God went to all that work freeing us, and then it's almost like a slap in the face to go back to the place where it all happened.
Yeah, God frees you. And we're going to talk even more about that. We're going to go even deeper, but I really, really appreciate that response.
Yeah, it would affect our whole mental state, our whole attitude of return, like a mental return.
A mental return.
To that state of being a slave, say.
Yeah, because that when you're in a physical place, it does things to your mind, right? It can free and liberate your mind. It can make you feel peaceful and joyful and serene. And it can also be a devastating return to grief. Now here, it's historically embedded, and we're actually much more sensitive today to what, for those of you who read The Body Keeps the Score, the idea that your body holds pain, that your body holds historical trauma, even trauma that you didn't experience, but that you heard about in stories, right? So for those of you who as so many do in the Livingston community, have deep Holocaust roots, survivor roots, but also families that were devastated, we're carrying that on our person in some deep way, maybe subconscious ways we don't even understand. So if someone goes to the extent of, God goes to the extent and says, I'm taking you all out, and so much was involved in that, why would you ever go back? But here's the weird thing. I'm going to add another weird dimension to this question. We are told in the book of Deuteronomy, when we are very close to being in the promised land, that's when all of these exhortations take place. Okay, so 9 times in the book of Devarim, we are told to never be slaves and never enslave again. And we're only told that 4 times in other parts of the Torah. So this is a very odd thing. If you're going to tell people not to go back to Egypt, what's the biblical book you're going to use to tell them? What do you think? I'm going to give you some choices. I'm going to give you 5 choices.
Exodus?
Yeah, Exodus would be the natural place. Exodus is the natural place that you'd say, we left here, you should never go back. And what's interesting is maybe there's a thought, well, I'll ask you, why do you think that is? Why do you think in Exodus we have fewer exhortations than we have in Deuteronomy? You're going to see where I'm going with this, but you got to travel with me a little.
It's too close, so it's too painful. I don't know.
It's too close. It's too painful. It's too threatening. Paula, you want to say
Every
something?
time they say it, they're reprimanded for it. Where here, they have to go in and they have to capture new lands, which has to be very fearful for them.
Right.
And it's a lot easier in their mind to go back to Egypt.
Right. So even though they can be so far from the temptations of Egypt, the flesh pots, the things that we were attracted to, you could still say, I have Egypt dreams. And in fact, I'm afraid when I come into a new land, then I have to be a homeowner, then I have to farm land, then I have to fight enemies. You know, it's overwhelming. And maybe you just think, I want to go back to that place where someone else did all these things for me. There's a piece of Talmud that says that God gives a blessing with every curse. And the blessing of servitude is that you don't have to worry about what you're going to eat. Right. In other words, you think to yourself, oh, you have a structure. You know, maybe I've mentioned this before because it was so haunting for me. My Zaidi, alav shalom, used to say that the hardest time of the Holocaust was when he was liberated. Right. Because there's nowhere to go. You couldn't go back home. And there was no structure, at least in the camps. Your day had a structure, right? Someone else was determining the way you spent your time. Here, every foundation of your life had been erased and you had nowhere to go. You had nothing to build. So when you're thinking about leaving Egypt and all that it takes to get out of Egypt, you think, wow, it's so tempting to go back. Now, let's think about the things that we get stuck in. And I'm going to use weight loss because it's just an easy example. And an everyday challenge. Person goes on a diet and they go on a diet for many, many months and they really do well. And they look in the mirror and their clothes fit them better and they feel less self-loathing. And then all of that hard work, all the exercise, all the restrictions, all of a sudden they just let it all go. So then you have this feeling, and I've had this before, what did I work so hard for so many months? And I proved to myself that I could do something. And then I undermined myself because I just went back. Because we are all in Egypt at some point. We are all, and the closer we get to the promised land, sometimes we self-sabotage, right? The closer we get to our goals, we're almost there. We just ruin it for ourselves. Am I the only person to experience this? I think so far, yes. Anyone else want to talk?
I don't think you're the only one.
Oh, thank you. But you didn't say that you're the one. Okay, but it's just okay. It's just me. Okay. Okay.
No, it's not just you. I think it's everyone.
What?
I think sometimes it's hard to admit when you self-sabotage.
Yeah.
Sometimes you do it and you don't even realize you're doing it until it's too late.
Right. But then that's the question. Is it too late? Is it too late? When Alicia says, I've reached the limit of what I can do. But actually he somehow knows subliminally that he has not reached the limit, that he could do this if he wanted to, that he was lying to Rebbe Meir because he's saying to him, because there was a time when he could. So we all are carrying this Mitzrayim, this force of Egypt that is attractive and pulls us. And when do we start talking about it the most? When we're the closest to success, when we're at the promised land, whatever that promised land is in your own mind. This is the person I most want to return to. This was my happiest state, right? And you'll ask people, and sometimes you ask them that question, where is a place or time that you want to return to? And they realize something profound about themselves. I loved myself when I was doing X, or I loved the world when I was in this particular place. And then all of a sudden you say, why am I so far from that place? Why have I put myself in Egypt when I really wanted to be in Israel? So I want to go back to our sources and just look at this a little bit more. I'm doing something wrong. Okay. So that's the prohibition. Egypt constantly appears in Sefer Devarim. So I just wanted to read you a few of these verses in case you didn't believe me when I told you that so many of them appear here. V'zacharta ki eved hayita be'eretz Mitzrayim v'yotziacha Hashem Elokecha misham biyad chazaka uzro netzuya al ken tzivcha Hashem Elokecha lasot et Yom HaShabbat. So Egypt is the reason that we do certain commandments, and one of them is Shabbat. And then we go that's chapter 5. Then in chapter 6, we're going to have to put this bad boy all the way back. Don't forget God who freed you out of Beit Avadim. And then there's the Pesach questions, right? When your children say, what are all these laws about? And you say, Avadim hayinu leparo mitzrayim v'yotzeinu Hashem mitzrayim b'yad chazakah. We know all these things. God took us out and he gave us these marvelous signs and these wonders, and he gave us this freedom. And later on in chapter 7, don't be afraid of them. Think about when you're afraid of your enemies, right? Paul said, they don't want to go to the land of Israel because they don't have to fight. They're going to fight their enemies. And God says, no, don't be afraid. Remember what I did to you. I did for you to Pharaoh and to all the Egyptians. I want you to, I need your staying power just a little bit longer. And says, and what happens if you forget God, the God who freed you from the land of Egypt? Now there's a constant drumbeat here. This is chapter 5, chapter 6, chapter 7, chapter 8, chapter 15, chapter 16. This is intentional. There's a certain theme that's running through this entire Sefer, and it's about a portrait of God. And it is, because we imitate God, a portrait of who we need to be when we get to this new place, right? When we get to this new place. And the God that we need to, that we need to remember is the God who liberated us from Egypt, who liberated us from the stuckness, from the quicksand, from the vortex of averot, of sins, of mindsets that are locking us and not enabling us to go forward. God is Redeemer and God is Liberator. And P.S., when you get into the land, you have to do the same thing, right? Bear in mind, it's not only that you can't be slaves anymore, it's that you've moved. When you're in Egypt, you're a slave. When you're in transition in the midbar, in the wilderness, you're in that in-between state. But once you become people, autonomous people, a sovereign people in a sovereign state, then you have to make sure that you become liberators. Because if you go back to Egypt, you will let go of the liberation that I have been exemplifying for you and that I expect you to exemplify for others, right? And here's the warning, right? Rak lo yubelo susim, we tell the king, don't try to get a lot of horses, because horses are associated with Egypt. The country, it's the things that are associated with Egypt. It's not only Egypt, things that are associated with them that may bring you back. And God says to the king in particular, you have to be liberator in chief, because I'm telling you, lo tosifun lashuv b'derech hazeod, you cannot go back to this place. This is not a good place for you. In fact, one of the curses, one of the klalot that we read in Sefer Devarim is, if I will send you back to Egypt and you're going to want to sell yourself into slavery, and they're not even going to want to buy you anymore. They don't even care. Micha Goodman wrote a wonderful book that's just been translated into English, The Last Words of Moses. It's a book about Devarim. And he basically says, the Torah is saying that a person who seeks to rule like Egypt is liable to become a slave to Egypt instead. Was Egypt a threat? It's not a thing of the past. It may become a thing of the future as well. It's not just a place we ran away from. It's a place we're liable to return. And the idea is, do not be like Egypt, and be like the God who liberated from Egypt. Now I say that because we tend not to mix up the season of Passover and the season of the Yamim Noraim. But there's a distinct message here about what we need to do to liberate ourselves. And sometimes liberating ourselves is not only a matter of staying away from a path that takes us backwards, a regression. It's actually keeping in mind all the time, if God liberates, then I have to liberate. My responsibility is to liberate others who are in pain and suffering, but actually I have to start with my own liberation. What is tshuva? Tshuva is the ultimate liberating act. It is saying whatever shackles have held me back from being the best person, from being God-fearing, from contributing to the community, going to minyan, doing certain mitzvot, giving tzedakah, whatever it is, whatever has been holding me back, I cannot be like Acher. I cannot say, everyone can change but me, because that is Egypt. And our job always is to get rid of the Egypt within us and to distance ourselves as much as possible. So that's a thought that I want to leave you with. And maybe just ask the question, what is your Egypt? What's the Egypt that you say, I can't go back here? And in fact, God took me out not only so that I could not be a slave, but so that I could actually be a liberator. What would true liberation look like for you? We could argue that even all of Pesach was all that whole trip was so that we could get to a Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So we get to this time of the year where we say, how are you going to liberate yourself? Anyone want to set the challenge?
Well, I think this is an answer to a great question that's always been asked. As we say it every year, I know it's formulaic because of all the chagim, but when we say Kiddush, when it's not Shabbos even, and I read you the passage, we say, Vatitem leno Hashem lekene ba'avaz yom hazikaron hazeh yom teruah mikra kodesh zecher l'tziat Mitzrayim. People always ask, what in the world is Rosh Hashanah? Why would you mention Yetzias Mitzrayim on Rosh Hashanah? And that's exactly this idea.
Yeah, it's that there's something that bubbles within us in the national collective. And we say to ourselves, we actually have a narrative like this. We've had a narrative for a long time that Israel has the most ethical army in the world. And there's Moshe Halbertal is a philosopher, a famous philosopher who's written widely on Tanakh and Jewish philosophy, who sits on a committee, the ethics committee of the army, along with many others. So that's like a narrative. I'm sure that everyone on this Zoom screen has heard this at some point. That Israel, and sometimes when facts conflict with that, it's very painful for us because this is an important narrative that we've been holding close. We also, as a country, we're first responders, right? When others are suffering, our notion of the world is not only that we are good to ourselves, it's that we're the liberators of others. I just had a very interesting experience this past week. Last year, we took a group of students, 31 YU students, to Morocco. We met with Muslim students, a variety of Muslim students in different universities, and we went to the High Atlas Mountains. Saturday night, we hear about the earthquake in Morocco, and that was actually one of the locations where we were. So a lot of that area turned into rubble. And I was very proud. One of our students was the first person to post it on our WhatsApp chat. And then the question is, well, what should we do about it? If you go there, what responsibility do you have to be the quote unquote liberators, to be the helpers, to give the charity? And we started a campaign, and we just sent $18,000 in 4 days, a student campaign. And today we had a Zoom with some of the university students that we met there so that we could understand the plight that they're in. And I thought to myself, I hope that they carry this with them, these students with them, every time they see something that's broken in the world. And we see that all the time. Is my narrative that I take care of myself, or is the narrative of the promised land the promise that you give other people and that you give yourself, that you can be the great liberators? And I think that's a very powerful and empowering narrative that we need to share with our children, that we need to remind ourselves when we're feeling stuck, and that we actually need to think of the God. Why does it keep saying God took you out of Mitzrayim and therefore you're going to be fine? It's saying God was the liberator, and therefore your next job is that you're the liberator. And tshuva is, to me, in my mind, the greatest expression of liberation. It's not only that we can do this collectively, but that really we can do this individually. And that's really just the thought I wanted to share with you. If you have any questions.
Can I say something?
Please.
Okay, maybe this is simplistic, but I guess you can say that I love myself when I'm successfully facing challenges. And so I look forward to different challenges, but some of these challenges can be not just positive, but can they also be negative challenges?
Of course.
I mean, okay, so we're not necessarily saying we're always looking forward to the positive.
No,
it can also be a negative challenge that also will impact in a very, very specific way.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on the challenge, but I think there's a danger in putting yourself somewhere where you're moving backwards. And I think that's part of the tshuva process, is saying, if it's going to be real, what supports have I given myself so that I can maintain this? Or have I created an unrealistic demand of myself, but there's just no chance that I'm going to get there, because I really haven't put all those things in place that can keep me to where I want to be. And it's hard, because this is everyday work. It's everyday work. That's why I mentioned sort of the holiness of people who are trying to recover from addiction. And it is, I had a very, very powerful experience once. I want to share with you, because we're good friends. I was at a Shabbaton in a retreat center, and the particular group that I was with was not so observant, and they didn't arrange services, but there were other groups there. And so I walked into a service of another small group, and they're singing L'Chadodi on Friday night. And it's like they're just singing their hearts out. This is such an inspiring davening. And then we get to Uri, like, rise up. And the person who's running the davening turns around and he says, all of us in this room are addicts, and all of us in this room need to lift each other up and protect ourselves from going back to this dark place. Now, all of a sudden I understood where I was. And then I had a little fear that people would think that I was struggling with this. And then I let go of that to just be in this very vulnerable moment with people who found the words so moving, and the song so moving. It was as if you felt that the song itself was trying to guard them from going back to a dark place, and they had each other. So I think that we need each other. And that's the beauty of having a powerful and amazing rabbi in Rebbitzin. And I wish them that Hashem blesses them for health and joy and meaning, and to give strength so they can continue giving to the community. It's why we need to be in a community and give to our communities, so that we're sort of investing in the community that's holding us accountable and holding us to our best possible selves. We know who those people are. And we know who those people aren't also. Yeah. Other thoughts, comments?
We'll have to make your book. Obviously, everybody should this next 10 days read your book, Return. And it's very inspiring every single year. And also, if you're not into the reading, I just came across a great interview on a podcast called The Orthodox Conundrum, in which Eric appeared with Rabbi Scott Kahn. Really, really, really great podcast. Listen on your way to work or something. So it's one of the more recent episodes. Highly recommend. And thank you. Sorry, Carol, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but plugs, advertising. We have to advertise.
Actually, I'm going to put in the chat, we just put together in YU like a 10-day challenge with short essays. So I'm going to put that in, and maybe Rabbi, you could put it in the newsletter if it hasn't gone out yet. If people would like to read that. I'm sorry, Carol, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, when you talk about all this tshuva, it's easier to be your best self helping other people.
Yeah.
It's hardest if it's something about in your own personal life, that every year you might be working on the same thing, and after a while you think, well, it's enough already. So I might could agree with that story, that at some point you feel like, let me work on something else, because clearly this isn't going well.
Well, listen,
so sometimes you do give up.
Yeah, but we're also different people. The old Heraclitus, you can't step into the same river twice. You think you're the same person, but you've had experiences over the course of the year that have changed you. Whether or not you're conscious of it, there might be big changes and big transitions, and there are smaller ones. So there are things that we're locked into this rigidity of our identity. And it's interesting, Rabbi, because you mentioned the book Return. I was thinking that this year I was thinking about what we can't return to, right? Not the turning towards, but the turning away from. And why do we have this chastisement? Do not return here. And I think because there's something much deeper going on about the liberating of the nation as the metaphor for the liberating of the self. Yeah. Any other thoughts, comments? It's wonderful to see you. I look forward to being with you. I give you the blessing of not returning and regressing, but moving forward and advancing, and feeling that the tshuva that you hold on to, the things that you want to return to, and the places and people and the time period, those elements are really important. They make life what it is. Wishing you and your families a Shana Tova, a beautiful, joyous year ahead.
Right. Shana Tova.
Same
Thank
to
you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Erica.
Good night. Good
Jennifer.
night.
Good night.
Night. Thank you, Shana Tova.
Tova.